This meeting on stress is nobody does stress on the bees. And Dana is a very, very unique person in that he is a professional educator who became a commercial beekeeper following the example of his uncle and grandfather and some of the relatives up there in Ohio. He's very good with people. He's very good with bees. He has incredible insight into both the communication, education, and the bees. And Dana and I have known each other and been friends for many years. In fact, we first met back in 1994. So Dana, why don't we go ahead and start and let you take it and go.
Okay, this is something like the old fireside chat that they had back during the Depression, you know.
There you go.
Being kind of locked in with COVID is, you know, we get cabin fever a little bit. And Judy and I, we've been more or less confined to the house. And thankfully, I've got a bee yard I can run out to and have a lot of fun in. But we're not having much fun, you know, doing social things with people that we know. So it's a delight to be back with you guys again. I'm going to go through this PowerPoint presentation rather quickly and hope you have some questions at the end. BJ asked me, 6 months ago, whether, maybe even longer, BJ.
December.
I would talk on the stress of honeybees, and I thought to myself at the time that he asked me, what the heck? I have a lot of stress on me. If you're keeping bees and keeping them alive, beekeepers are going to be stressed out too. And the saddest thing is to see a new beekeeper lose a hive of bees. I had about 600 hives at one time. I'm down to 14, but I do some mentoring, and there are a lot of disappointed people who start beekeeping and suddenly something's wrong with their hive. So we can talk about stresses on honeybees and on beekeepers tonight. And in order to do that, we're going to rush right through this thing. And if you have questions, write them down and we'll get to them. You know, keeping honeybees is challenging. And the biggest question I have, even now, is how many hives am I going to have alive when it comes spring? And so we're going to try to address some of those stresses that I'm going to be coming up with. Let's see if I can get my program to work here. Forward. Oops, let's go back. Okay. You know, COVID is a virus, and we've been talking about viruses with our honeybees for quite some time. I think we can probably understand some of the issues facing the honeybees just by our own human experiences with COVID. Honeybees do a number of things as they mature. I think all of you know that the work that honeybees do in the hive is based depending upon their age. And also, when they begin foraging, they have to deal with an environment that they live in. Any kind of factor that changes during a honeybee's lifespan really ends up affecting the whole colony. And if problems are discovered and they're not solved, our hives die very quickly. Somebody asked me how many times they should open their hive and take a look inside. And I've come to the conclusion, if you don't do it every other week, maybe 3 times a month, you're in big trouble if something does happen. So let's take a look at some of those things. And I do want to point out honeybees have a strong instinct to survive. For example, if they lose the queen, they'll try to replace the queen. Stressors are those things that stress honeybees and us. So I guess a stressor is something that can be chemical, environmental, external, or internal, or human. I had a student I mentored this year who stressed her bees out because she was in them all the time, had to find a queen each time she opened a hive. That's not really good for the bees. And it's something that all of us should take into consideration when we're watching our bees. Don't just open a hive without a reason for doing it. And I think it's important for us to maybe look back just a little bit at what has got us to this particular point. I started looking for some statistics that I could share with you. One statistic I found was that in 1940, there were about 6.5 million honeybee colonies managed in the United States. Most of those were managed by people that had large numbers of hives. I can remember back in the 1990s, we'd have a club meeting and maybe we'd have 30 members. We'd have a bee school and maybe 15 people would come to a bee school. Moved that ahead 10 years. By 2005, we had at Ohio State University a bee school that was set up to handle about 25 people maximum. We ordered books and did that. We had 60 people show up. All of a sudden, 60 people. What do you do with 60 people? Your classroom holds maybe 30. And somebody said, well, we got to draw the line somewhere. Well, the money was good because we were getting $50 per student. And the treasurer kept saying, just let them come in. We'll let them stand around the walls and things. You can't teach a class well with that many people, some of them uncomfortable. And I more or less thought it was important that we maybe divided up into smaller units. We ended up with 4 classes offered at different times because people have different schedules. And then in 2010, because of CCD, the United States Department of Agriculture began to study this thing on the collapse disorder. And by 2012, they had a rather large group of people who came to these conclusions. And I'm going to have to put on my glasses. I had eye surgery this week, by the way. Wonderful thing for me because I didn't realize that I had a real big problem. But I have reading glasses. And I'm going to read to you the 5 things that they pointed out in 2012 that were stressors. 1, they concluded that the parasitic mite, varroa mite, was the most detrimental pest to honeybees. The second thing is there were multiple virus species associated with CCD, and they are still there. That bacterial disease like European foul brood was being seen more often in beehives. Number 4, which I think is probably the most important because my bees, I can share with you 2 different bee yard locations that I have. Nutrition has a major impact on individual bees and colonies and how long and how well they can survive. Nutrition here in Raleigh, this is mostly a large pine tree area. A lot of urban beekeeping, people having nice yards and things. We just don't see dandelions in people's front yards or in their yards at all. I have 4 hives here now, and I'm feeding them to keep them alive. 26 miles away, I've got a bee yard in Franklin County that's on a farm, and there's a lot of goldenrod around it, several different ponds. The farmer doesn't spray, so I was just driving by part of the farm yesterday or the day before, and I saw sumac growing. I saw bees just coming and going with goldenrod like crazy. Those bees are all heavy, and I don't have to spend a dime putting any sugar on them to keep them alive. Then the 5th one is the acute and sublethal effects of pesticide associated with the decline of honeybees in general. The wide use of pesticides has had an impact on our bees and is a stressor. And then I want to take a look at the bottom of this page. The number of individuals owning hives in the United States has increased, while honey production in the United States has declined 9% just between 2017 and 2018. Think about it. Most of the beekeepers in the United States are hobbyist beekeepers. The commercial beekeepers have a hard time staying in business. In 2009, Troy Ford, who is executive director of the American Beekeeping Federation, estimated there were 100,000 hobby beekeepers in the United States, which was down from 200,000 in 1970. By 1920, the latest thing I could find, the largest number I could find, I'm sorry? 2020. Oh, 2020, sorry. During 2020, the largest number I could find of beekeepers in the United States was somewhere around 300,000. I don't know where he got his number. It's the highest one I could find. North Carolina, by the way, just to brag a little bit, has approximately 4,700 who belong to the North Carolina Beekeepers Association, but there's a lot more than that because many people don't belong to a beekeeper association. Let's take a look at one issue that I've run across here in Raleigh. Can you believe somebody selling all their bee equipment, practically brand new, garden hives? They had a smoker, bee veil, bee suit, everything. They just wanted somebody to take it. They had trouble. When I talked to this beekeeper, I said, "Why are you quitting?" He said, "The bees died." He had 2 hives that had wax moth in them. Frames didn't amount to anything in these 2 hives. And his neighbors were complaining about keeping honeybees. They just didn't like him having bees in his backyard. So to keep peace, he just wanted to get them out of there. I did buy these bees, by the way. Quite a bargain. Other reasons for people quitting: it costs too much to keep my bees alive. There are people around that just don't want to treat their bees. Or they won't treat their bees. Most new beekeepers think in one thing when they start beekeeping, and that is they want to get honey. And the first year they get nothing. And then always neighbors complaining or aggressive bees. And the most important thing is they just couldn't keep their bees alive. I was raised in a commercial beekeeping family, and my dad was rather a tough taskmaster. And I don't know who told me this, but I think it came from someone in my family. Think like a bee. I don't know how in the hell you do that. We try to make them do what we want them to do. And We want to provide them with a new home or a good home and try to do what is good for them. But you need to have a good understanding of biology in order to do what is good for them. We make decisions, a lot of decisions. What kind of hives are we going to keep the bees in? Top bar hives, long hives, Langstroth hives. We do know that for a hive to survive, they need a good queen and they need to be disease-free. The home that they occupy has to be well ventilated, and that's really important during the wintertime. I was a bee inspector in Ohio in the 1990s, early 90s, and had a beekeeper who called early in the spring, said all these bees were dead, wanted me to come out and see what was the reason for them being dead. What he did is he took garbage bags, took insulation, wrapped these hives in insulation, each one of them individually, put a big black garbage bag over each hive, right down to the entrance, and just figured he's going to make their hives nice and warm like we have in our house. Well, I've never seen such a mess in all my life. There was green and blue and white mold all over the place. They were living in a rainforest. Of course, the bees were smelling, and it was a mess. But he was doing what he thought was best for the bees. Another thing I see as a big problem, and that is honeybees generally don't move laterally to get their winter stores. They move upward. And as far as I'm concerned, if you have a double deep hive, most of the winter stores should be right above the brood so that they can move up with the heat as the weather gets colder. These bees have, for millions of years, survived. And they survive because they have a stinger. And I mention this stinger for one reason. It is a stress factor for humans. How many people do you know that will blame honeybees for any sting that they get? They don't know whether it's a hornet, yellow jacket, or whatever. But they go bananas sometimes when it gets into talking about honeybees. If you're a beekeeper living in a rural area, you don't have much of a problem. But if you're living in an urban area, you need to know that you have to practice what I call good human relations with your neighbors, good neighbor policy. Okay, what is it that we as humans think is best for the bees? What is it that's best for the bees? I think it's better off to just leave them alone sometime than to try to get in and do all these fancy manipulations and various things that cause the hive to undergo trying to correct what we've done. I've said it here, bees are subjected to the wants and desires of their keepers. And then the other factor is the environmental impact that we as humans are doing to our world. Okay, BJ said something to me earlier today that struck a note. He said, you know, spend a little time talking about queens. I don't know how many of you in this audience have lost a hive because the queen, for some reason or another, began to fail. The people that I mentor, I generally try to do 5 beekeepers every year. You know, I'll hear, well, the bees just up and left. Why did they do that? I don't know. I can't answer questions like that. Why did they just up and leave? I've seen bees abscond. I've had bees abscond. But sometimes we have queens that are so very poorly mated, sold in our packages. They are raised in the spring of the year when there's very few drones. The demand for queens is great. And the people who go out and harvest these queens in the mating yards really are more inclined to take a queen from a mating nuke, even if it hasn't laid eggs, and put it into a cage and stick it, and that cage gets stuck into a package. And then there are others that probably are not well mated. I heard one time many years ago that it took probably about 12 drones to 12 to 20 drones to mate with a queen. And gee, I thought that's an awful lot, because most of the bee books said that she mated once. And of course, our thinking has changed on that. We now know from DNA and so forth that a queen can carry a number of markers that indicate that she mated with a number of drones. A hive without a queen is in a lot of trouble. I see people trying to let the bees raise their own queen. They don't want to buy a new queen. They will have a queen. They'll find supersedure cells. They'll cut the supersedure cells down. I've seen people who just take a poor queen and just nurse her along, baby her. My dad called these welfare hives. People just don't want to kill a queen, and if she's in there, no matter what kind of a job she's doing, the attempt is borrow some frames from another hive and put it in to the hive failing. In my way of thinking, what we're doing is we're just promoting that poor queen to be a poor queen and fail a little bit later. Every hive, if it's going to succeed, has to have a strong bee population. They have to be healthy, and this goes through the entire season. A hive going into winter, as you have now, one of the things you should be doing is making sure what your mite levels are. Don't wait too long, because we're going to have some cold weather coming up here pretty soon. This is an example. This frame is a drone layer, a queen that lays unfertilized eggs. And if you see a hive like this where the cells are domed, I think of these oil tanks that they have out in the oil producing states that project kind of above the ground like a dome. You take a look at the brood on this frame, and that's exactly what you're looking at, is drone brood. I don't know whether I've seen a hive with a lot of drones and very few workers. It seems like the colony, once the worker bees have died, it's done. The only advantage that I can think of with a hive like that is if somebody wants to inspect it, they don't have to worry about being stung, because drones are not going to give you a problem. Laying workers are also an issue, and it seems to me like this problem has gotten worse and worse over the years. Laying workers, generally speaking, the queen starts out and she lays eggs. The colony builds a population. Sometime in mid-summer, you'll see a shotgun brood pattern, and she's failing. And we'll see some drone cells like this along with worker cells. Another problem, stress on the bees, human-made, is, I don't know why it is, but a lot of people like to go to the center of a hive. You take the inner cutter off and you expose the frames. They reach down and try to pull a frame right out of the center. And they roll. When they pull it up, they just roll bees off the side of the frame. Queens can be killed so easy that way. And of course, In some cases, they'll be able to requeen themselves. But back to this, I gave a lot of thought to what stress I produce when I go to my beehives. Every time I go to my beehive and I try to prevent them from doing something that they naturally do, like try to do swarm prevention work, I'm upsetting their apple cart for the most part. I pick them up from one location and move them to another location. Sometimes I leave stragglers. Sometimes I kind of think of it as, what would your kids think if you just picked up your house and moved it and expected them to find it on their own? We take away their honey, sometimes too much. If I don't like their queen, I replace the queen. There's a period of time that it takes the bees to accept a new queen. And this is a biggie. My hives are placed too close together. I like to put them so I can walk between hives and get around and work the hives, but they're usually stretched out in a row. And with this COVID, I read a lot, and the studies that have been done would indicate that bees stacked close together spread disease from one hive to another. For example, if you have small hive beetles, they start out maybe in one place, and the next thing you know, they're all over. Same way with varroa mite. The problem that we have is basically we are contributing to the spread of the disease. Again, I compare this with COVID. They talk about we need this 6 feet between each one of us. Hives of bees need quite a bit more than that. Another thing I've noticed, when I moved into North Carolina, I came down here with no bees. So I decided to get a few bees, put them in the backyard, just play with them. And I thought I was the only person in this community that had bees. I built a little fenced-in garden, hid them behind some shrubs, and I didn't know whether we had an HOA or anything like that, and did not want anybody even to know I had them. And the next thing I know is I've got a neighbor about 2 blocks away that came to me and said, hey, welcome to North Carolina. He had heard about me from somebody. And he said, do you have any honeybees? I said, yeah, I've got them in my backyard hidden away. He says, I've got mine just down the street. Got 4 hives. Person across the street from me has 6. And then I started thinking, okay, I wonder how many other people in the neighborhood has hives. The treasurer for the 5 county beekeepers lives about a half a mile from me. He's got hives in his backyard. And then I've got a student just 2 blocks away that's got a hive in her backyard, now 2 hives. And then last month, Wake County asked me to make a presentation, and one of their technical people with the technology we have with Zoom came over and set me up and helped me through a presentation. He's got hives and he lives in the neighborhood as well. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, I see a lot of robbing and stuff in my bee yard, and I know they're not my bees. And I just couldn't see where all these bees came from. Now I know this neighborhood is overpopulated. That's one of the reasons why I took my bees out into the country. You know, my yard looks nice. I don't have any dandelions either. How can I blame somebody else for having a nice clean yard, getting lawn service in to spray for weeds and things? This is a community of about 300 homes, each home having about an acre, and you won't find a weed anywhere in this development. We have something called Yard of the Month. We've won it here. It's awarded by the HOA, and I'm a beekeeper. I mean, look what I'm doing. Now, if we violate the bee space, and this is another problem that we have putting stress on honeybees, this happens to be a feeder from a student of mine. She bought a feeder to put on top of her hive, a plastic feeder. And, you know, I'm trying to be up with these students to help them do what is good. She bought a medium deep super and put this feeder in it. Left about 1.5 inches between the feeder and the top bars of the brood chamber below it. And the bees did what they do naturally. They just tried to fill that area in. Here was a bunch of burrcomb, belled every which way. If she had put a super on top of this hive with new foundation, the bees would have put all that energy into drawing the comb. But what do you do with this? Put it in a wax melter? It's also something that I noticed that a lot of us, and I do this. I go to my beehives, and when I've got burrcomb on the top bars, I got bees all over the place. I smoke them down. I take my hive tool and clean the top bars. I was reading someplace that, you know, look what damage we've done to that hive. They will just go back and redo it. Maybe take them a week or so, but they'll undo all the correcting that I have done. And that puts a lot of stress on the bees. We do as beekeepers do. We don't want them to mess up the top bars of what the, you know, the aesthetics of looking good and nice is good for us, but not really for the bees. And I've asked a question. Have any of you seen what would happen if I pulled one of those frames out of the box and did not replace it? The bees would take care of that by belting a comb from the bottom bar above the empty space down through this space that's been vacated, and they'll have a comb in there really nice and probably filled with brood, and we come along and we pull that frame out above the box, and we got this huge amount of wax and comb hanging to the bottom of the bottom bar. Okay, these are the stressors in a beehive. I just threw these together. Probably I should put varroa mite right at the top of the list, but diseases are there too. The foraging areas where they go out to gather food. I see here in Raleigh, my bees get honey and can draw comb up through the end of June. Come the 1st of July, you will see the most insane action going on in the bee yard with bees robbing. If there is a weak hive, it doesn't take them very long to wipe it out. But they do that because there's a lot of bees hanging on the front of hives and that sort of thing. The temperatures are in the 90s, and they just don't have enough places to go get food. Our management techniques stress bees out. Maybe some of you have questions afterwards. We've got small hive beetle here in Raleigh, and we've got wax moth, and we've got some fire ants, and we have some four-legged creatures, even including bears, within probably about 26 miles of Raleigh. So we've got all kinds of things that can stress a beehive out. The viruses I mentioned earlier. And one interesting thing happened this summer, which caused me to put weather in this list. I had a new beekeeper who went out and got the crap stung out of him. And I've been with that person and worked the bees, and they were pretty gentle, really easy to work. And sometimes I'm somewhat like BJ, work without a bee veil or anything. And I just couldn't believe it. And they went out when a storm was threatening. I mean, it was bad weather was coming in. And boy, I'll tell you, they almost quit beekeeping because of that. It wasn't the fault of the bees. It just, you got to work bees when the weather is suitable. And then later on in this, you're going to see this human effect. And I'll mention it when we get there. Diseases, I don't know whether you've ever had American foul brood, but it's the most contagious disease I know of. And the best solution is to burn the hives. Some states do allow the use of drugs. You need now to get a prescription for terramycin, for example, to treat for disease. But if you really want to get rid of it, burning the hive and the bees is about the only way to go about it. Some people might differ with me there. Chemotherapy, there's side effects with putting chemicals in a hive, and you need to understand that that is, in some cases, helping the bees, but overall, any drugs are not good. Do you know how many hives are located in a 2-mile circle around your hives? And I'm just suggesting use Google Map as a possible search. Are water sources available? There's all kinds of environmental issues, and this brings up the question, a lot of people get a lot more money when they can sell honey that is free of any chemicals, and we've got a word to describe honey like that. It's called organic. Do you know what's around your bee yards? Any hazardous waste locations? Heavy traffic? I had bees located near a pig farm one time, and they gathered a lot of molasses that was used with the pig feed. Rather interesting, the farmer was complaining because his pigs wouldn't eat during the day because my bees were over there in the troughs. And pigs are smart enough not to stick their snout into the trough during the day when the bees were around. Who's spraying orchards, trees? A lot of chemical application in this area. I'm thinking of a Zika virus for the mosquitoes. A lot of that kind of spraying going on. And there's my story on molasses a little bit. You know, there's 2 seasons in beekeeping. There's a spring, a time when the bees are really building up. And then there's a summer toward fall when things are slowing down and the bees are more or less getting ready for winter. I've noticed one trend. I kept bees in Ohio, and in Ohio, you don't make splits in September. But I noticed here in North Carolina, there are people who do make splits, but the weather here is a little bit better. And I would suppose where BJ's at, you can make splits pretty late in the year. But if you're going to do that, you've got to feed the bees and really be on the ball to make sure that the bees have something, food such as syrup, gives them an incentive to feed more brood, and you can build brood when normally the brood factor is decreasing. I don't know whether you're in the mindset of making hive increases in late summer, but for me, right now, it's too late to make splits unless you're way south in Georgia. One of the things we've been trying to do is raise queens that are resistant to varroa mite. I want to hurry through this. Varroa mites, I think you probably have seen them, but varroa mites on this pupa that has been pulled out of a worker cell. There's problems with ants, wax moths, four-legged animals. These are all insects of opportunity for the most part, or skunks will feed on bees. We've got wax moth, which is a problem. Have you ever seen this many ants on an inner cover lid in your life? These ants literally entered this hive. This also came from a student's hive who is feeding through a feeder over the inner cover lid. And boy, the ants really came in there. Small hive beetle, big problem. Bears, I'm trying to speed this up a little bit. Mice, it's good to put some guards on your beehives just to keep those suckers out. Moisture with weather is a big factor, and try to keep your hive as dry inside as you possibly can. High winds, blowing covers off, and strong winds is a big problem. These are things that people need to take care of. We had a real hot weather here in Raleigh this year, a lot of days over 90. Bees need water, and if we don't have them, one thing I like to do is use that Boardman feeder and just fill it with water, and the bees have water right at the entrance. And this is an example of a honeybee with virus. The shriveled wings and so forth would indicate to you that this is not good, because a bee that's born without wings or with shriveled wings isn't going to be able to do much. And then this is a picture I wanted to point out to you. Look at this guy spraying. He's dressed up really nice and good. This is what we as human beings do in our orchards. We get in there and we just spray the daylights out of the orchard, even if there are bees sometimes visiting the flowers. I've seen that. In this neighborhood where I live, I know a neighbor right next door that's spraying for mosquitoes, and I had some die off last year, and I had to move my bees to the other side of my yard in order to try to solve that problem. This is my cursors point out the movement of bees leads to transmission of disease. And for those of you who wondered, where did these mites come from? Where did the small hive beetles come from? Whatever. In the late 1990s in Ohio, we were starting to deal with serious infestations of small hive beetles. And Ohio was talking about not allowing me to bring my bees back from Georgia to Ohio. And I panicked and got them out of Georgia as fast as I could. But the fact is, hive beetles and the mites have been transported all across the United States. If they were discovered in Florida, within a year or two, they were in New York State or in Minnesota or wherever bees were moved to. And if you happen to have a bee yard next to where a commercial operation put bees for pollination purposes, for example, your bees would come down with this disease as well, or I guess I'd call them a pest rather than a disease. Okay, we're getting close here. If you ask me what we do to reduce the stress, I would say I inspect my hives to do the least amount of harm. Each hive inspection sets a hive back a little bit of time. Uh, Bees that were out flying come home and they stay to protect their hive a little bit. Just taking the top cover off is enough to interrupt what a hive is doing because they've got to stick around and protect other bees that might come in and rob them. So in red, I've got inspect only when you have a purpose in mind and do not keep a hive open for a long period of time. New beekeepers, I notice, keep a hive open for a considerable length of time. Experienced beekeepers get in there, they do what they have to do, they size the hive up and close it pretty quickly. And I think that's one of the reasons why maybe experienced beekeepers do not have all the problems that maybe inexperienced people have. And then getting stung, big question I'm sure all of you are familiar with is, how many times have you been stung? Okay, that pretty much wraps it up. It took me a little longer to get through this, but if you want to contact me at any time, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. My email address is stahlmanapiaries@aol.com. I'm also Dana Stahlman on Facebook. I don't use Facebook very much. And I have a website called gobeekeeping.com, which is in the process of being revised. I'm doing a lot of work on that site, and hopefully by January the 1st, it will be pretty well set for the next bee season. I have some beekeeping classes that I'll have on there. I write a weekly article called Monday Notes. Monday Notes will start appearing on the website. I have some books in a library of old bee books that will be put on this site. And of course, continue with the test that's on that site, because there's a random generator that puts 50 questions out and gives you a chance to answer questions and grades those questions and let you know how well you did right away. So BJ, I'm ready for some questions, and I know I've used a lot of time.
Well, let's, do we have any questions?
I have one.
Very
Go ahead,
good.
Shannon.
Hi,
Shannon.
thank you. That was a great presentation. I am a new beekeeper, and I am very curious as to keeping the moisture out of the hive over the winter. I'm in Canton, Georgia. So I've heard different things like I should do a quilt box, I shouldn't do a quilt box, I should have upper and lower ventilation, I shouldn't. So I'm really confused as what to do to make sure that the moisture is controlled.
Okay, well, relax. What I would tell you is the quilt is an old technique. People have used shavings and various kinds of things above the inner cover to kind of absorb moisture, and that does work. If you have an upper entrance on your hive, in Ohio where it got real cold, a lot of people have an entrance. In other words, your inner cover has a little slot in the end, so bees can actually come up into the inner cover, and then they have an opening to get out, and that vents the moisture for the most part. It's interesting you ask that question, because the one thing you don't want to do is put a plastic inner cover or something like that over your bees, because what happens is the moisture rising from the bees collects in water droplets on that plastic and then rains right back onto the bees. That's very bad for them. But if you have an inner cover with a hole, and it's really interesting to note that people who have old equipment sometimes have holes in that equipment. Bees do fine during the winter in some of those hives. I know Billy Engel, one time I was at his house, and I noticed one of his hives had a corner rotting out in one of the boxes. I mean, it was pretty obviously not good looking. something that most of us would replace. Bees were coming and going, having a good time. In fact, instead of using the bottom entrance into the hive, they were using that opening near the top of a deep box. But the thing is, the moisture has to be gotten out of the hive. Like I told you about that new beekeeper that wrapped his hive in plastic, that's the worst thing you can do. You have to give that moisture inside the hive a chance to get out. Do not feed your bees with a mixture of sugar syrup that is high on the water in. Just make sure that the bees, I like in the summertime to feed 2 to 1, 2 parts water, 1 part sugar. But in the fall, I cut it to 1 to 1. And then later on, I like fondant or sugar just spread around the inner cover hole. Because anytime you add water into the food for the winter for the bees, that creates more of a moisture problem.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. I appreciate your question.
Who else?
Dana, I was wondering what you do to maintain or get rid of the hive beetles. What is your technique?
That's interesting. I learned quite a bit from Billy Engel. And he always mentioned to me, keep your bees out in the sun, full sun. Don't put them under shade, that sort of thing. And in Ohio, I didn't have much of a small beetle problem. And I like to work in the shade. It's comfortable to work in the shade, to stand out in the sun, beating down on them. I'm 81 years old, and you know, I can't work for very long in the sun. And so I do like shade. But small hive beetles are a big problem here in Raleigh. And in the hives I've got in my backyard, beetle buster or beetle jails or whatever you want to call them are put into the hives. Use apple cider vinegar. And on the farm that I've got over in Johnson County, I don't have a small hive beetle problem at all. And they're sitting out there in the full sun. I think that had something to do with the reason of course, my hives over in Johnson or Franklin County, they are strong. I've got some really strong hives. And they are on a goldenrod flow right now, and I just am delighted to see them packing in so much honey and big bee populations. That really helps the small hive beetle problem a lot.
So when you say you use the beetle barn, correct? You mentioned that. And you also mentioned apple cider vinegar. How do you just put it in there in drops, or do you soak a pad?
No, I don't use
something like that.
The beetle gel has a little tray that fits between frames, and it's got some bars on it like a queen excluder that keeps the bees out, but the beetles can go down in there. And what they do is they drown. Beetle gels are fairly inexpensive. I think they're like $1.50, $1.75 a piece. And you'll find out real quick that they work nice. And you put them in, you put some vinegar, apple cider vinegar in it. Some people use various oils. Maybe you've noticed that they're drawn to pollen patties. You could take some pollen and kind of drop it down into the beetle gel to attract them, but they do work well.
Thank you very much.
No problem. What do you do?
I use the beetle barns, and I know BJ had mentioned actually inside of those I use fipronil and make sure that the bees don't get access to that. So it works pretty well. This year we haven't had as many hive beetles as we have in past years. Well, in my hives, but I've been overrun with it before I started the beetle barn technique. So it's
Right.
good information.
Well, I know that in the past, people sometimes took CD cassettes and they put uh, um, a poison in the cassette, drilled holes in the side of it so bees couldn't get into it, but the small hive beetles could. I've seen similar things like that on the market too. And you can buy that. I've never used it, but there are a number of ways to treat for these small hive beetles.
And I have, if you don't mind, one other question. I know that you know, some folks treat, or most folks treat at the end of July, beginning of August here in Georgia with Apagard or Apalivar or some chemical like that, or a natural oil. Do you treat later on in the fall, or do you treat in the spring? How do you?
I like to start early. If I get package bees, you talked about oxalic acid. Joe Lackshaw put me on to a system where you can mix the oxalic acid in a solution, put it into like a spray bottle, something like you use to spray on window to clean windows, and just spray the outside of the screens of the packages when the bees arrive. And I've done that. And it does, packages do come with varroa mite. No matter what anybody says, I don't see how anybody can keep hives on the large scale and make packages up without them. They'll come with a certificate that says they're disease-free, but they're thinking mostly American foul brood is a disease. The mites need to be taken care of just as early as possible. The earlier you do it, the better the results are going to be, because if you wait, the populations of mites just increases tremendously by the time you get to midsummer. And the bee population is starting to decline by midsummer, and the mite population continues to grow. Once you get past what I call an economic threshold, that threshold is somewhere where you can live with mites, but you don't have to kill all of them before they kill your hive. And that's when you do a sugar roll test or something, and if you see just a few mites, there's nothing to get real excited about. But if you see a lot of mites, you got to do something right now. Don't put it off.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation.
Well, BJ, I really appreciate being with your group. I've got a dry mouth. I don't know whether I'm not accustomed sitting here and talking to my computer, and it's nice to see faces on the screen, but I'm familiar with your area. For those of you who know BJ, I got to tell you, I've got a lot of respect for BJ. I was going to, in fact, he offered to give me some locations in around ball ground, but he did one thing that caused me to turn him down. He said something about bears, and I decided I would go further south in Georgia. I was going to, I ended up going down to around Thomaston, down toward Columbus, Georgia, Moultrie, that area, and had a chance to work with BJ. Both of us were involved in taking package bees, producing package bees, and I would drive them back to Ohio for sale. And we raised some queens, and BJ has developed some contacts in Ohio, and we have we talk every now and then, but I've asked BJ to get me an application for your club, and I would like to be a member of your club. I've taught in your bee school. once or twice, something like that. And I've always enjoyed the response I've got from your members.
Well, you
Anybody?
can get that application at CherokeeBeeClub.com, or I can email you one, Dana.
Okay, well, I'll try your website.
Okay.
But I do want to stop in and visit with you too. As soon as Judy and I get over that direction, she would like to get into northern Georgia and see a little bit of the Smokies, that sort of thing.
We'd be happy to have you.
Yeah, well, she just said to me, I'd be happy to get out of the house. So, best of beekeeping with all of you. And if you ever want to contact me, you can check with BJ, or you can go directly to my website. And I do answer my emails. So with this Monday Note article, I've had surgery a couple times this past month. And so I've dropped off on the writing of my Monday Notes, but yeah, Judy just said, just tell them it's cataract surgery. And I had a little cancer on my ear that they took a pea-sized chunk out of. And, but the eye surgery is no big deal, but I'm still down to putting 4 drops in my eye every day. And it makes me blurry-eyed after I take a drop. So it's kind of a pain in the rear.
Charlie's got a question. You want to unmute your phone, Charlie? There you go.
Actually, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to thank him for being on the meeting. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. It's really static talking to my computer screen. I do like to interact with members in a club, and I do like to get questions, and I learn so much when we can have that kind of an atmosphere where I learn from you and share information.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions right now. They've got your contact information. This will be a live recording available for the next month on Zoom, and it'll be on the website for longer than that. Ryan, are we keeping them on indefinitely or archiving them after a period of time?
Yes, I started a YouTube channel. It's if you go to YouTube, you can search Cherokee Bee Club, and it'll pop up all of these sessions that we've had, and it is archived permanently. Also, that'll be available on the website on our blog. You can go there and actually view it. It's embedded in the website.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana. Look forward to hearing from you and talking to you in the future.
Oh, you'll certainly hear from me.
Okay, we're going to close the meeting. So, good night to all.
Good night. Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, BJ.
Thanks, Stephen.